All right, so let's talk about the different metering modes we have, and I want to talk about three main metering modes which are available on most camera brands. I want to talk about this first, these 9 different things here. I will not talk about these ones because it's only for specific brands. I want to talk about evaluative or matrix metering. Okay. I want to talk about center weighted metering and about spot metering. All right, so let's start with evaluative of matrix metering. What this is basically is the camera. If I point to this scene, this landscape in Iran, if I point here, the camera is gonna take the whole frame and is gonna try to measure the light in the whole frame and calculate what exposure would match to expose for kind of everything. So he's going to measure the light on this sign, he's going to measure the light in these very bright clouds, and he's going to measure the light in these dark rocks. So, and he's going to try to expose for something in between for me to see everything. It's kind of very convenient for, I think, everyday scene, yeah, because it will give you best results for most of your scenes, even the most contrasty ones. It's really useful for landscape photography, and it's the mode I use most of the time myself. The next thing we have is the center weighted metering, and what this does is instead of using the whole frame to measure the light, it only uses an area in the middle to measure the light, which in this particular picture would have been very useful. The camera would only have measured the light on the face of the boy without caring at all for this dark area and this bright area and this dark area. It would not even have looked at it. It would have only measured the light here to expose correctly for what is in the middle. And the third thing we have is the spot metering. Spot metering is a bit the same as the center weighted metering, just even more defined, even smaller. The camera is only going to use a little spot in the middle of the frame or where you are moving your focusing points, depending on the brands, to measure the light. So it's up to you which metering mode you want to use. Everyone has their favorite choice. Just remember, okay, I want you to think in terms of practicality over technicality. For me, it is not, when I approach a scene, I'm not really going to think about which metering mode I want to use, because to me it is slower to change my metering mode than to play with my exposure. And let me explain to you. If I walk around a scene and I'm using a certain metering mode, and I will show you that actually, you know what? Let's go into Hoyan. I will show you how do these different metering modes work, and what do I use and why do I use this, so then you can make the best choice for you. Let's get into Hoyan. Okay, so just to show you the different metering mode and what I think personally about them. So right now I am using the matrix metering, also called evaluative metering, and what it does is it uses all the elements in my frame to measure the light. So I have very strong contrast. I picked this scene especially because the contrasts are very strong. I have some really black shadows and some really white highlights here, and so the camera tries to measure a bit for everything. So what it does is it overexposes a little bit the highlights and it underexposes a little bit the shadows. It's very easy for me to underexpose the picture a little bit, -1 to now stop overexposing the highlights. If I was to use the evaluative metering, so the one using the more central area to expose, I bring the exposure back to 0. You can see that now it is exposing for the highlights because I am pointing to the bright wall. But if I was to point to the dark, still it measures the light on the dark and on the bright. So you use about this area in the middle, so the exposure is kind of okay. If I switch to spot metering, now it is only using the really middle. Look at that. If I point to the very bright highlights, it will expose for it. My exposure is on 0, yeah? Really exposing for the highlight. And if I move a little bit to the shadows, look at that. It completely changes the exposure from the highlights to the shadows. And I believe this is very useful if you take photos or if you take portraits, or if you take a photo, if you want to expose for the highlight and you know you will be able to point on your highlights. But as soon as there is contrast in a scene and you move in the wrong place, my exposure, oh, it's wrong, oh, it's wrong. I adjust my exposure, I underexpose, I move, oh, it's too dark now, or I overexpose and then I move here, oh, it's too bright again. I find the spot metering a little bit difficult to use when the scene is contrasty. I usually use the matrix metering, the one using the whole frame. I found that it usually gives me better exposures.